Check. Are we live? Are we live? Yes,
I hope
we
so.
are.
Woohoo.
Welcome to the ExLife, the podcast with Christine. Hey, wait a minute. That's not Christine's voice. Who the heck is this? You are right. I am not Christine. I am Salt. I am Christine's coach and best friend, and I am taking over this podcast because introducing yourself is so awkward. So instead of Christine, right, rambling on and on, do you really want to ramble on and on about yourself without having
Not
a
really.
conversation with another human? See?
No,
This is going to be
that's why
so
you're
much
here.
better. I'm going to ask the questions that we all want to know so that we know if we're in the right place when we listen to this podcast. So are you ready?
I am
Are you ready to
Let's
bear
do the
all of your
thing.
secrets? Just
I'm
kidding.
ready. Most of them.
All right. So, like the ExLife podcast, how long have you been thinking about starting something like this?
To be quite honest, it's been thought of for years in different forms. So I originally thought I want to help women, and how can I do that best? Should I write a book? That came and went, not really sure, didn't really know if I'm considered an expert. So who's going to buy that? And then I thought about YouTube, and that was great. But since I'm more of a free thinker, podcasts seem like the ideal method. And then I can get it out to more people by sharing it to YouTube. So podcasts, here we are.
I love that. Okay, first of all, I love that you've had this on your heart for so long, and it's been in different forms: book, YouTube, podcast, and you're like, sounds like as you're sharing, you weren't really feeling like, oh, I can't do that yet. Who am I to write a book? Who am I to have a podcast or a YouTube channel? And so that can really stop a lot of people from sharing what they're meant to share. So I want to acknowledge you for showing up, for sharing the things that you will on this podcast that I'm sure are going to require courage, and they're going to be wise. They're going to be full of lessons that will, ask you to be vulnerable and sharing parts of your life. And so I really want to acknowledge you for doing that, because a lot of people talk about this, but they don't do it. So gold stars. First, let's just
Thank
lay
you.
that foundation. Yes.
Thank
And when
you.
you say help women, I mean, this is called the ExLife. So how exactly are you hoping that this podcast will help women?
Well, the ExLife doesn't seem to relate to women, right? Just off the bat. But it was more of, what are the things that we've been dragging around? And I'm relating more to women because women tend to live more in the dark and shame. They tend to live the life they've been given. They tend to, just try to get through it. And it's hard to make those changes. But I want this ExLife podcast to be an inspirational podcast. Like, this doesn't have to be your life. This can be your ExLife, your old life. And let's talk about things that will spur you on, inspire you, have you thinking, and maybe, hopefully, taking some actions to move toward your best life.
Look at you dropping that little lyric. Go from your ExLife to your best life. I love that. That's awesome. Okay, so are there some specific topics that are part of the ExLife that you want to be diving super deep into?
Yeah, I think, well, I know from experience because I've been divorced, and there's this huge bubble of shame and guilt and am I doing the right thing? And people are either stuck trying to work out a marriage that hasn't been working, or they're stuck saying, how do I move on from this? This is all I know. I have kids, whatever. And also there's people that have been divorced or going through the process that are like, where do I start? Like, how do I rebuild my life? How do I move on? How do I live? Do I have the same friends? How do I get new friends? What am I supposed to look like? I've been looking like this for a long time. I want to change. I want to do a new me. What is the new me? Do I want to get in shape again? Do I want to eat better? Am I already doing that? Do I want to just ready to jump into the dating pool? If so, how do I do that? Should I do that? Am I ready to do that? Have I done any work on myself? Do I want time to myself? Do I want to date myself for a while? And there's just so much that's not talked about because I've researched this and it's just not out there. It seems to be this stigma that's out there for when you're thinking about getting divorced or getting divorced, and especially if there's more than one divorce. So people don't really talk about it, and I want to open up all the conversations to talk about it, to bring all of these women out of the dark and into the light, and to, support them and help them, like I said, kind of move into a better way of being and being happy inside.
Wow, I love so much of the things that you just said. And the way that you talk about it, it's totally obvious that you've lived through a lot of the topics that you want to unpack on this podcast. So, are you willing to tell us a little bit about the things that you've been through in terms of like divorce, moving on from an ex, reinventing yourself, asking yourself the deep questions, getting the support to grow as a human being so that you can create a life that actually reflects you? Like what do you want to share about that? And I know it might not be all of it because this is one episode and it'll be sprinkled throughout the entire podcast. However, there's probably some big milestones that you'd love to share right now.
Yeah, it was hard for me because I'm one of those people that has like the multiple divorce history. And going through all that would be a really long episode. So we're not going to do all of that right now. But like I got married the first time at 21, and it was kind of just one of those things like you're expected to do it. You're Catholic, you just, you'll graduate, you find a husband, you get married kind of thing. And when I got separated, this was in the 90s, there wasn't the internet, there wasn't as much information available. There wasn't all these, influencers and personal development. I mean, I think back then it was Tony Robbins, like he was the guru and that's kind of all you'd ever heard of. And that wasn't his thing. His thing was like, personal power, which was kind of helpful in a way. And he did help me, but that's a story for another day. But it just, particularly after like it not working out more than once, and the most recent one, I had a child with my ex. And so there was so much guilt that I had inside, so much shame. Like I didn't talk about it. I didn't know a lot of people who were like me. And there were so many successful marriages out there. I felt alone. I felt like I just have to act like everything's okay. And these people have a great marriage. Look, they're still together. They look perfect. And then, of course, the advent of social media, that's what people do. They upload all the positive. They do all the filters. Life is just wonderful. So I feel like people are even more alienated in an age where there should be more information. And a lot of my experience has allowed me to become resilient and to learn from, the past. I don't want to say mistakes because I feel like every turn of your life is a learning opportunity. And I feel like people want to live their best life and they shouldn't be ashamed of moving on from something that's not working after they've put their heart and soul into making it work, particularly if the other party is not invested. So learning to rebuild my life, to, pull up my bootstraps and move on and, do it on my own. I never felt like anyone should support me or, not necessarily help me, but I never felt like I'm going to rely on anyone. I'm going to do this on my own. So you learn to rebuild, you learn to get out there, you learn how to find new friends, you need new friend groups, you need support. And that's, I think, what's lacking because during certain times, it didn't feel like there was a lot of family support because, a lot of people consider divorce a failure. And I think that's wrong to look at it that way. I think it is an unpopular, opinion. And I think people really need to feel supported because that's something that I needed really badly. Like I turned to my faith. That really did help. Sometimes I wasn't real happy with God, didn't really want to be divorced and all of that. But God was always there. God was the person that was always there, in the dark. And when I was alone, when I felt like I had no friends. And even when I didn't turn to him, he was there to help me find my way. And I've always been really into personal development, and I used all the resources I could get my hands on, books and, like I said, those tapes, and eventually some type of social media, but it was still not directed at divorced people or people going through divorce. It was just like relationship oriented. So I did dive into a lot of that, and I always wanted to be better and do better. And throughout all the turns of my life, I've figured out what it is I do want. And I learned to stand up for myself and what I wanted and not do what was expected. And I think that's hard for a lot of people because it was hard for me. So did I answer all of your questions?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We went to so many beautiful places. Before I ask you some of like the key things that you learned in order to become the person you are right now, I'm just thinking, like, if I'm listening to this podcast, I'm wondering, but does she really know how bad it is? Like, I am in a really bad place. Like, my relationship is a really big mess, or I have a lot of shame, or it actually was my fault, or, all the things that we can sometimes carry around that make us different than the other people who have successfully navigated the same thing that we're going through. So just to take yourself off the pedestal, off the person who's figured so much of this out, and to just be in the trenches with someone who's in a lot of pain listening to this podcast. Can you share some things about the really tough times? Like maybe some things you did that weren't very healthy, or maybe some thoughts that you carried that weren't true and were really toxic for you.
Oh, for sure. I mean, and granted, I was lucky in that none of my relationships were abusive. So I wasn't dealing with that. And I understand that is out there. And that is a completely large issue that needs to be addressed on a case-by-case basis. But I think in every relationship, there's always trauma that arises from, just communication, immaturity, hurtful words can be just as hurtful as a hand or a fist at times. And so there was some of that loneliness, where you feel like you are alone in a marriage. You feel like you're part of the furniture in the house. And that is really a horrible feeling. I remember I would be driving home to like my family, and at the time I had a baby. And as the closer I got to my house, I felt more and more building dread. Just dread, because I didn't want to be there and it felt wrong. So that was just something that I feel like when you feel that way, and after trying so hard, you get to a point where you have to, something inside you just screams like, life has got to be better. You have got to do something. So, okay, so you move out, or you find a way to move on. You separate, and you suddenly are by yourself, which I have to say, when I bought my house after that marriage ended, and I went into my house the day I settled, and I sat in my empty house in my bedroom on the floor, looking out a window, I felt at peace. So I knew I had made the right decision. But the road was not easy. When you separate and you're trying to find your way, and you're trying to find love, which is always been my goal. Always a believer in true love. I'm the one that's like, well, what about the movie where it ends up and it's so perfect? And I had a bad habit of trying to fix people or thinking it'll be different with me. Like I can work with them. I'm patient. I can fix them. And the people either weren't the right fit. I sought out, in a way, I almost felt undeserving at times. I couldn't make my marriages work. So I sought out relationships where they wouldn't build me up, because I didn't feel like I deserved that. I didn't feel like I deserved any better. So there was behavior that was negative because that's all I felt I deserved. And that was hard. That was really hard because at the time you're feeling, self-destructive almost. Like that's all I deserve, and you're feeling self-destructive, and what the heck, I'm going to do it. And then you realize later, how demoralizing that really is. You realize that you do deserve better, but it takes a lot of time and a lot of, self-exploration, a lot of digging deep inside of yourself. And there's destructive habits like, hey, I'm just going to sit around and eat what I want. I'm just going to watch TV. I'm not. So it's not a quick fix. You don't just separate and all of a sudden your life is fully 100% better. It's a learning curve. It's a learning experience, and you just have to take it one baby step at a time and not try to, eat the whole elephant, because that's kind of a prescription for failure in and of itself. So that's like a couple of examples of the negative behavior, but I'm certain there are more. In terms of what you're saying, it definitely wasn't all roses and flowers and unicorns and rainbows.
Right? Whose life is?
No.
So now that we have a picture of like some of the things that you've gone through, and again, you'll continue to share as the podcast moves forward, but it sounds like there was a lot of relief when you found yourself on your own, because that decision was very difficult for you to make because of obviously ties to your exes, but also the fact that there was a child involved, and then that just makes it even more complex. You had some feelings of, unworthiness and some confusion about who you were and what you really wanted and what was possible for you, and then some unhealthy habits that developed as a result of too much privacy maybe, or not knowing really which next step to take. So whether it was like eating or just kind of like losing days in Netflix or whatever it was, you've managed to step out of those unhealthy patterns, step out of that feeling of unworthiness, or at least towards feelings of worthiness, and then actually like building things into your life that you love and appreciate, and that have changed how you see yourself and what you deserve. So would you share maybe some of the highlights of your current life? Like, what do you love most about what you've built for yourself up until this point, which we know you're obviously a growth junkie, so you're continuing to grow every day and continue your self-exploration. But just like, what are some highlights that maybe people listening right now can be inspired by?
Well, I am not a fan of working out. It's just not something I consider fun, right? I'm not like, yay, I'm going to work out today. But I have like over a long period of time, like I do have the habit of moving my body, and I used to think I had to do it every day. Like I've done all kinds of workout programs and things like that, but I listen to my body, and I know that I don't need to go hard at it 24/7. I know I don't need to do like 3 hours. I know I don't even need to work out every day because it's just as important for your body to rest. But the one habit I do have is moving my body and making sure that it feels good. And sometimes it's, there's something happens, like you injure yourself or you go too hard, you have to recover, and that's okay, even though it's frustrating. But I feel better after I work out. I feel like I've processed a lot of emotion. It's because it really does bring out those endorphins within yourself, which I used to do this class called Body Jam, which I loved so much. But then I moved and I left the gym where the class was, and then COVID and all of that. But I am older now and I probably would have more trouble with it. But I think it was a great thing to find something that I loved. And I think that's still important. If you can find any activity that you love and do it, that's the key. So I would say that exercise is important, no matter whether it's a walk or 10 minutes a day or whatnot, just doing something for your body, even if you really don't like exercise like me, I feel like it helps. I eat pretty well most of the time. I have I don't exclude anything from my diet, because then my body like rebels and is like, well, I want the cookie. And then the cookie becomes like this huge cookie or a pack of cookies, like in my mind, like I can't stop thinking about the cookie. So I don't exclude anything, right? In fact, I'm sitting here with a Chick-fil-A cookie nearby, but you have to have your little indulgences, your little, even a daily treat. Like I have a Starbucks today. That's not a normal thing. It's a treat, so I have things in my diet that make me happy, but I know that I also feel better when I eat better. So I tend to eat, vegetables and just lean meats and things like that. Things that also work with my body, because as I've gotten older, my diet has changed. My body has changed. I have I can't eat really cow's, milk anymore. I don't eat a lot of gluten, right? So I've had to change that, which is really frustrating, but hey, welcome to premenopause, I guess. And, it's just, I do feel better when I eat that way versus feeling heavy and gross when I eat, just whatever I want and I eat all the junk. So there is junk and there's a place for that, but it's a treat versus an everyday or overdoing it. And I do feel better when I'm a little lighter. So that's also a thing. Like, I want to fit in my clothes. I don't want to go out and not be able to find anything in my closet, because then I get depressed. So that's another thing. It's just an overall healthy diet. I'm a moderate, not even a moderate drinker. I'm an occasional social drinker, so I don't do a whole lot of that. Especially as you get older, overdoing it just feels horrible, and you spend more and more time recovering than enjoying yourself from it. So that's changed too. I found myself a life coach. She's pretty awesome. And we've dove really deep inside, like past traumas and things that I really care about, and put a lot of focus into that. And I think that there are traumas for everybody, and you don't even know that they're there until you ask yourself the right questions. So asking myself the right questions and really diving in and figuring out, what was holding me back. That's been an amazing thing, a journey to go through, and it's helped my marriage. Now I'm married and very happily so, but no relationship is perfect. You're not going to find a perfect relationship, for sure. Every relationship takes work. You have to find the right relationship that you want to do the work. And so I've done a lot of work on that by working on myself, because the triggers that used to be there are less inflammatory. And I know now how to communicate better, how to think about what those triggers are bringing up in me. So that's been a huge change because, nothing is going to, I have no control over other people, but I can control how I feel and how I act and how I react. So that's really been huge for me. And also seeking out this passion to help others, because it's been on my heart for a long time. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to the personal development space, because I really want to contribute and help people. And, those are people I admire because they're helping people just to help. They're not necessarily looking to get anything out of it. So
That was such a beautiful answer. Yeah, it was great. I'd love to just kind of reflect on what you said. Like, it was interesting because I said, okay, so what kind of life have you built now and what are you most proud of? And you immediately started with talking about exercise and nutrition. And so if I'm listening to this podcast and I'm like, okay, but this is about the ExLife. Okay, I get what she's saying. Like, she used to do that, maybe not as well. Like, maybe she didn't feed herself as well and she wasn't as consistent with exercise. So maybe that's the point. But then the more you talk, and knowing you so deeply behind the scenes as a person involved in your life, I know what a systematic, thorough thinker you are. So I'm like, we're going somewhere. So we're going through, and then it's like, and then I drink, but socially, I'm like not a big drinker. So we're really into like this self-care foundation of the new life that you've built. And then you said, because I understand myself, because I've asked myself these questions and gotten a coach and investigated some of my past traumas and the triggers that are involved and the beliefs that I held that were not serving me, I'm able to show up differently in my relationships now than I was in the past. So it's like, not only is your relationship different in that you are with a different person, but also you're different. So the way that you listen, the way that you speak, the way that you offer compassion or grace is like a totally new version of you in relationship. So it sounds like you began with yourself and then you were able to bring that into your relationship in a more productive way. And that's huge. I hear you taking responsibility for who you are and how you're showing up in your relationship. And I'm wondering, how is that affecting your relationship? Because you didn't actually do all this self-discovery work, then find a new person, and then have this relationship. You've actually been in your current relationship for quite some time, and you have reinvented it. And so I think that that's also very helpful for the person who's listening to this, and they're like, my relationship's miserable and I don't want to leave and start another one. I want to be the solution in this relationship. Or maybe they've just left someone and they're like, I don't want to recreate this relationship, knowing that they are, a huge part of what works or what doesn't work. So, tell us, how in the heck did you go into the same relationship, bring this new you, and get some benefit or results that are different? What is the most noticeable for you that's different in your current relationship?
Well, and I have to say that you don't know what you don't know. Like, when I came into this relationship, I had technically been single for a decade, right? So living on my own, independent, great life, all this personal development. I felt pretty far along, like pretty different. I had learned so much. And then I came into this relationship. And it's funny how, after some time, like the honeymoon period goes by, suddenly, without even realizing it, you put the same record on the record player. The same grooves start popping back up. And as far as you thought you had gotten, you realize that it is so easy to fall back into old patterns. Because if someone lights the match and, strikes it against you, you're just going to react the way you always have. And so as far as I felt I came by myself, it wasn't until really, not only finding the right person, because I really am very committed, and every time, it was asked, well, is this, the right person? You've come so far. And I'm like, yeah, this is the right person. And I kept my thing was not, it was not taking responsibility, right? So I thought I was so far along. I wasn't the problem. I couldn't be the problem. I've done all this work on myself with and without a coach. I'm not, it's him, he's the problem. But it took some time to realize that I had to communicate a lot differently. I had to listen differently, and I had to respond differently. And I actually had to ask the question of, is this intended the way I'm taking it? Because I'm a pretty sensitive person, right? Like I'm a sensitive Pisces, I take everything to heart. And, I'm not saying men are perfect by any means, but was the intention behind this action or this comment really to hurt me, really to cause me all this turmoil that I'm feeling? That it was it intended to elicit this response? And I had to really dig deep into, okay, he loves me. This is not the intended reaction he was looking for. Could it have been said better? Yes. But it was more about being thoughtful as to what the intentions were. And are these triggers that are just embedded in me that I need to, change? Do I need to change these triggers? So it was me taking the responsibility, taking the blame off the other person, and trying to do better on my part. Because if I respond differently, then he will respond differently. Otherwise, it's more like a tennis match, back and forth, back and forth. Who's going to win? Who's going to win? That doesn't help anything. And you're here to be on the same team, not be on opposing teams. So it was just not working. So trying something different like that, really stopping and listening, and also trying to give that person more time. I'm a person that likes to address things right away and talk things through. And most men are not really like that. They want it to be over. They want things to be fine. They'll say whatever. They are hardly listening. But it turned out that over time, like they have a different time period than I need to process. So taking a step back, allowing them to take time to think and process, resulted in a better outcome, even though the conversation is, like, communicating is always a challenge, because men, I guess, in my opinion, tend to not want to have a talk. Let's talk. They're not really into that. So it was more of me trying to give more grace, more patience, and try to turn that around and try not to just take things so personally. Because that was my biggest thing. I took everything so personally, and that had to change. And it's still a work in progress. Every day, every week, it's still a work in progress. But if we get a little bit better every day, every week, then that's all you can really do. That's all you can ask for.
Well, I love that. It sounds like your communication's changed a lot. Your listening filter has changed. There's more of a pause between the meaning that you're giving something and then how you choose to respond. There's a lot more compassion and understanding that is more automatic for you, or at least less difficult to generate. And it sounds like, I mean, I guess I should ask because they wouldn't know, like your listener wouldn't know, like, do you feel like you're any closer to your person? Do you feel like things are more intimate or more positive? Or like, what would be the outcome of the difference that you're bringing to the communication in your relationship?
Yes, I feel definitely that this style has brought us closer. And what I mean by that is like allowing more space. Not only in conversation or communication, but also physical space, allowing this person to have their own space to do their own thing and not taking it personally if they need that time and space. So that's important. And I feel like it has brought us closer. Like my taking that pause, he appreciates that. He appreciates that I don't instantly react or instantly think the negative thoughts I thought before, instantly think that it's all about me, because that's ego, I guess. So definitely not all about me, but it's definitely brought us closer, and he can see that behavior is changed. And, it's not just in our relationship, but in our family relationship, because we have a blended family. So that's also another set of huge challenges. And it's changed that dynamic as well. So, and also just figuring out my priorities and what they are, listening to what he needs, and doing my best to give him that.
I love that you brought that up because that's such a huge thing to navigate. Like having your own child and then he has his own children and then becoming this new family where everyone has different expectations, different blueprints of parenting. And so trying to bring them together in a way that's collaborative and that has the least amount of conflict possible while also recognizing that it is a little bit of a different dynamic because, you're new to each other. And so it sounds like, what you've been doing has been improving the family dynamic as a whole also. And that really gives a lot of hope to someone who is in the process of looking to improve that. And I love how genuine you are. Like, it's not perfect. I'm not perfect. He's not perfect. Our kids aren't perfect. Our marriage isn't perfect. Fitness isn't perfect. Food isn't perfect. And like, really, who wants it to be perfect? Honestly, like anyone who's telling you it is just full of it anyway. So
It's not real life.
real over perfect all day long. In closing, what do you want the person listening to this kind of like about you interview? What do you want them to take away from this so that they know they're in the right place and they come to the next episodes and just go on this journey with you of what it's like to, navigate breakups with self-compassion and respect, or to reinvent relationships in a really positive way, or to reinvent their life as a single person in a positive way? Like, what do you want them to know so that they stick around and take part in these conversations?
Well, I want them to know that, you can show up as you are. You're not alone. And I have been through so many different relationships and circumstances. And the key is just to not give up, to continue to want to do better for yourself and for either your current relationship or a future relationship, to realize that tomorrow is not a guarantee. I mean, I just had a friend pass away out of the blue, shocking. And it's more like, are you happy with the humdrum of your life? Or do you want more? Do you just want to be happier? Not saying you have to live this huge dream of, building a business or anything like that, but do you want to be happier? Do you want to make your relationship better? Do you want to seek out better ways of doing things, or get some other options on how to move forward and be your best self? You don't have to live in the shame or the guilt or the stigma or the unhappiness or the what else is there. There is more, and I haven't given up, and I want to help everyone get through that. I want to shed some light on these topics that are buried and aren't talked about. And I don't know why, because this, unfortunately people in the world don't always stay together. So regardless, I just really want to provide that help, that support. I want to listen and really try to do some good, right? Make people feel like they're not alone.
I love that. And I love that you said you want to listen. So listening, maybe you'll have some interviews, which would be really cool on your podcast. However, listening can also be like reading through comments, getting suggestions on future show topics. So how do you want to listen to the people that you're doing this podcast with? Because it's a we thing. I know that's important to you, and it's on your heart for it to be a community, not just you speaking into the ethers of the internet.
I think that's the key, is that I do, that one of my attributes I've always heard from friends that I've had for years and years is that I'm a good listener, and I give decent advice. And I'm not here to necessarily provide all the answers, but I want to listen to what people need, what they're looking for. And if I don't have the answers or the advice, to help work through it together, try to find the way out of the darkness into the light, and listen to them, obviously comments or any type of feedback would be helpful, because there will be, YouTube and obviously the podcast. I want to make myself accessible to help as many people as possible so that they know someone is listening to them. Someone really does care, because I do care and I want to help just the way I wish I had that help years ago.
There's a great quote, and it says, "We give the medicine we need." And that's how I see you in this new starting line of this beautiful podcast that, you're right, will live on YouTube. It'll live on all the podcasting platforms. And you'll, of course, want to get like feedback and questions and suggestions for topics and people raising their hands to be interviewed and all those kinds of things. And it's like, you're seeing and listening and helping people and removing the barriers of connection and removing the labels of shame, because those are the things that you struggled with the most. So you are giving the world the medicine that you didn't feel that you had. And that's
Correct.
always a beautiful thing. So thank you for showing up for us.
Yes, of course. My pleasure.
Do you want to end with anything quirky? I feel like this should end in a funny way. Tell us something random and quirky about you so that we can just laugh and then be done.
Random and quirky? See, these are always the things I get stumped on. Okay, well, this isn't really random and quirky. Like, it's kind of like, you did what? Is that an okay, quirky, random thing? Or is it I love my dog? Random and quirky. All right, I'll just go with random. Something I never thought I would do, and I really did, was when I brought up Tony Robbins, like in the beginning of this interview. I did the, the weekend.
The fire walk.
Oh my God. Yeah, I did the fire walk. And it's a real thing. There are real coals. There is a real fire. And it's big. It's not like some little pad you're walking across. Like, it's several feet. Like, I want to say 8 feet. And you are not wearing shoes. So you spend that entire, like, evening before, because it happens like 11 o'clock at night. You're out there in the dark doing this. And you spend that whole time reframing your mind. Like, your mind is so powerful. That was the point of this exercise. Right. And I actually went to this weekend with the intention of trying to rid the guilt from my first marriage ending, because I'm Catholic and that's just a huge no-no. Right. So this was like the first exercise to prove that you have control of your mind. So literally, instead of like looking at the coals and be like, oh my gosh, I'm getting ready to walk on like thousands of degrees of coals, hot fire and bare feet, you had to say to yourself, cool moss. And you had spent time inside, like, eyes closed, cool moss, and picturing it. How does it feel? What does it smell like? And it worked. I couldn't believe it. Like, I could not believe it. Now, granted, toward the end, because you start to lose a little focus toward the end of this walk thing you're doing. I did get a couple little teeny little blisters, like a couple little pebbles in there. Just a couple. But it worked. Like, it was real. And that was like the biggest moment of my life. Like, I knew that I had control of my mind, and I could do anything I set my mind to. So that was super powerful. Not necessarily quirky, but super powerful. I know. Dorky, maybe? I don't know.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect.
It does work.
That's awesome. It sounds like a great experience. And it's nice that you
It
had a couple little
was.
blisters. It reminds you that like you can get over it too.
It,
Like it's not going to kill
right.
you.
I was right. And it was like, it happened. It wasn't a dream. Like I woke up and I was like, oh, yep, little teeny blisters. But it was an amazing thing. And I think that just changing your perspective, whatever you've done that you said you didn't think you could do, that's a life-changing thing. And I think everybody should go through something like that, whether it's jumping out of an airplane, which I would never do, but something like that that you don't think you can do. It makes you realize, oh my gosh, I can take on the world.
That's the end right there.
Okay.
Boom. Hit that button.
Hit the button.